Brothers and sisters, welcome to the Son of the North podcast. I am your host Rex, serving as your guiding light through the darkness of this age. This is the 8th episode of the Son of the North podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to follow me on Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, BitChute, and other platforms where podcasts can be found. If you're craving more excellent Indo-European spiritual content, or you just want to know more about my daily life, make sure to follow me on Instagram at the handle Son of Dios. Without further delay, here is episode 8 of the Son of the North podcast. Enjoy. As I am sure you are quite aware of already, the adversarial evil seeks to corrupt all that is good and pure in this world. Fueled by their hatred for our bloodline and our peoples, the forces of the adversaries seduce us with bread and circuses. They promote a lifestyle of gross hedonistic excess, swindling many of our tribe into thinking that material possessions are more important than one's achievements and qualities. They promote lust and self-loathing, seeking to undermine and destroy the ties of family and community. They attack our heritage and our history, claiming that we have no culture and no future in the sick, twisted world they seek to build. The many weaker members of our tribe simply give in to the enemy's propaganda, while many others feel hopeless in the face of the enemy and decide to disconnect from reality using drugs and escapism. The strong members of our tribe, those who are aware of and resist the machinations of the adversaries, those who are true inheritors of the solar lineage, these people seek to maintain our traditions and bloodlines in the face of utmost evil. But all hope is not lost, for so long as our tribe lives on through new generations, there is hope. In preparation for this episode, I came upon a saying that I think is quite appropriate, one important that we should remember and hold close to our hearts in this age of chaos. Funnily enough, this quote is often misattributed to the Black American orator Frederick Douglass, but its real origins are unknown. I think that element of mystery makes it all the more powerful. The quote states that it is easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men. Indeed, us true sons and daughters of Arias are surrounded by many of our broken kinsmen every day. These weak and pathetic creatures, so fallen from grace, loathe us and themselves, despite the fact that we only act in the best interest of our people and for our children's future. But in the Kali Yuga, even the innocent are not spared from the machinations of our enemies. I'm sure that many of you have probably noticed the constant barrage of propaganda aimed towards our children by the forces of the adversaries. While our enemies are feeble and detestable, we cannot deny their cunning. By corrupting and turning our children against us, they are destroying the very foundation upon which our tribes and traditions are built. our children are taken away from us, forced into state-sponsored education institutions, where they are taught for 6 or more hours a day to hate themselves, their families, their ancestors, and their nation. They are fed toxic chemical slop, locked in classrooms, and denied sunlight. The powers that be seek to break their spirits with education in often meaningless subjects, only for the children to return home to spend their remaining hours staring at garbage media on a screen, media propaganda that is objectively anti-us. The adversaries seek to turn our children against us, and in doing so, destroy our people. This much is obvious. These targeted attacks against our youth have led many of our leanings to ponder whether or not bringing a child into such a world is fair to the child. This nihilistic approach is, of course, quite absurd, for not only do we have a duty to carry on our bloodlines and our ancestral traditions, but also there is so much beauty and wonder in this world that our future children deserve to experience. To protect our children from the propaganda of our enemies, Neotribalism offers them the best future. Free from the subversive curriculum of the powers that be, members of a tribal community can expose their children to the beautiful realities of rural tribal living and can feel confident knowing that their child is being educated by educators who genuinely care about their upbringing. For the upbringing of these children determines the very future of the community itself. This is part of the reason why I promote the establishment of neo-tribal communities for all noble sons and daughters of the sun, and why someday I seek to establish my own tribal community here in the Canadian North. Now, of course, such enriching environments are not easily available to all Indo-European couples who seek to start a family. If our children are to be raised in the midst of the adversary's system, then surely we can try our best to expose our children to stories and entertainment that enriches their life and promotes an appreciation for family, community, nature, and our ancestral traditions. But where can such children's entertainment be found? Fear not, friends, for today I will be discussing one such children's series. Today I will be discussing the many wonderful themes and complexities of the Moomins.
Snufkin!
Oh, hello, Moomin.
It's really good to see you, Snufkin.
And you, too.
You're back early. Weren't you having a good time?
Yes, I was. But I didn't want to miss springtime in Moomin Valley.
What did you do?
I'll tell you later. Let's go wake up Sniff and think of something exciting to do.
I don't think he'll like it.
If you are from Europe, then you are at least probably somewhat familiar with the Moomins. The series, which is set in Scandinavia, is not a household name in other parts of the world, but it has a growing following in North America and in Asia. Just who are, or what are, the Moomins, though? The Moomins, referred to in author Tove Jansson's native Swedish as the Moomin trolls, are a family of fluffy, round, white creatures that inhabit a beautiful oceanside valley known as Moomin Valley. In the far north of Finland, far away from the hustle and bustle of industrial society, the Moomins live a happy and simple life, playing in Moomin Valley's many fields and meadows, picking wild berries and mushrooms, fishing and relaxing by the sea, and often spending time with their many friends who also inhabit Moomin Valley. Their many misadventures not only encapsulate traditional living in the Fenno-Scandinavian North, but also embody a sense of wonder and loving community that is absent from most modern children's content. The protagonist of the series is Moomin Troll, often simply referred to as Moomin. He is a curious and adventurous young lad nearing adolescence, and an only child, living with his parents in a beautiful tall blue house that resembles an old chimney. Like all Moomin trolls, Moomin and his parents somewhat resemble hippopotamuses, though they are clearly identified in the books as trolls, forest and mountain-dwelling creatures from Scandinavian mythology, who clearly have their roots in Norse pagan traditions. Moomin's mother, Moomin Mama, is an embodiment of the perfect traditional mother figure, caring for the boy and his father by feeding them, cleaning their house, caring for their gardens, and healing them with her book of herbal remedies passed down through the generations. His father, Moomin Papa, was an adventurer in his youth who decided to settle down with the woman he loves to start a family, now spending most of his time working on his memoirs in his office. Every now and again, though, Moomin Papa feels the call to adventure, prompting him to lead the family and their friends into many wonderful journeys that are entertaining to people of all ages. Throughout the main 9 books in the Moomin series, Moomin is often defined by his bravery and his close bonds with his small group of friends. These friends include Snork Maiden, a lovely female Moomin troll-like creature who is Moomin's childhood sweetheart. Little Mai, a boisterous and sassy young girl whose tiny stature allows her to get up to all sorts of fun and mischief, often at the expense of Moomin and the gang. Sniff, a tall, cowardly, weasel-like creature whose love for money and get-rich-quick schemes is only surpassed by his love for his friends. And, perhaps most important of all, Snufkin, a wise, tobacco pipe-smoking youth who is Moomin's best friend. Snufkin lives a nomadic existence from his tent, living in harmony with nature in Moomin Valley, only leaving to venture south and wander during Moomin Valley's harsh cold winters. Moomin's friendship with Snufkin, and his coping with Snufkin's eventual yearly departure from Moomin Valley each winter, is a subject touched upon in many iterations of the original Moomin children's books and accompanying video adaptations. Snufkin is perhaps the series' most popular character, and for a good reason. His rather mature outlook on life and his love for nature and freedom makes him popular with many of the series' adult fans. He is indeed a quite thematically and symbolically complex character in an otherwise simple series of children's narratives, and this character's central role in the plots of many stories is not without thematic purposes. The many nuances of Snufkin are worth further discussion and will be discussed later in the second half of this episode. The Moomin series was the brainchild of 20th century children's author Tove Jansson, a member of the Swedish ethnic minority that lived in Finland. Born in 1914 in Helsinki, Tove studied art in Stockholm, Helsinki, and Paris in the 1930s. Like many among academic artistic circles at this turbulent time, much of her earlier work took on a political tone, drawing lampoon comics depicting Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin in a mocking light, even though her native Finland was an ally with Nazi Germany against the Soviet Union. If you subscribe to either of these political leanings, don't let this minor anecdote dissuade you from the series. Contrary to what some modern fans of the series might say, Tove's classically liberal political views do not bleed into the Moomin books. With her Charlie Hebdo-esque comics receiving little praise from Finnish citizens of all political leanings, particularly in leftist circles, Tove decided to instead focus on capturing her escapism and love for nature into a children's book series. The end result was The Moomins and the Great Flood, which was published in 1945 during the closing months of World War II. The following year, Tove released Comet in Moominland, in which the majority of the series' main characters were introduced. She would go on to release 7 more books in the Moomin series, with the last official book being released in 1970. Tove died from cancer in 2001, but not before her Moomin series had grown to cult-like popularity, enriching the lives of many children worldwide. While the Moomins was intended to be a children's series through and through, the often mature and nuanced nature of many of Tove Jansson's stories made them quite popular amongst adult audiences, myself included. I discovered the series while studying in the United Kingdom, searching for respectable European content for my nephew, who had yet to be born at the time, to watch. A Swedish friend of mine recommended it to me, and I became fond of the series after reading Comet in Moominland and watching several episodes of the popular 90s Japanese animated adaptation of the series. While many adult fans of the series came to know the Moomins through reading the books or watching the animated series in their youth, the series has seen an increasing popularity in recent years, which can largely be attributed to the regrowth in the popularity of the 90s anime. In particular, the series has become increasingly popular amongst two subcultures that have emerged as a direct result of the Kali Yuga. Subcultures that, funnily enough, could be considered in some ways diametric opposites. The Moomin series has become particularly popular amongst members of LGBT ideology groups, as well as various quote-unquote right-wing types, such as traditionalists, pagans, European identitarians, and eco-nationalists. It seems that interest in the Moomins from the non-heterosexual crowd stems from the author Tove Jansson's apparent bisexuality. Indeed, Tove Jansson was engaged to a man whom she loved apparently quite fondly. Snufkin himself was based upon this man. And she potentially had several romantic relationships with women later in life. Now, I'm not going to go on about this topic in detail, as it has very little to do with the Moomin series as a whole. Contrary to what some people foolishly believed, the Moomin series is not colored by the author's sexuality, which makes sense considering that homosexuals in the mid-20th century were not dedicating their lives to the spreading of their ideology. The contents of the books reaffirm this. There are no homosexual characters within the story, but there are many heterosexual pairings reinforced in the context of traditional monogamous relationships. The key example here being the marriage of Moomin Papa and Moomin Mama, who live together happily, taking care of their homestead and doing their best to help guide Moomin into becoming a kind, reliable young man. Of course, modern adherents to an aggressive anti-heterosexual agenda turn a blind eye towards this, instead opting to invent and celebrate fanciful homosexual pairings that do not exist within the books, and are in fact outright refuted by the books themselves. To many depraved individuals, the close bonds of camaraderie and friendship between Moomin and Snufkin have been interpreted with perversion as reflecting a homosexual relationship. Now, ignoring the fact that they're both children, the relationship is never hinted as being anything other than a close bond between males, with Moomin having Snorkmaiden as his childhood girlfriend, and Snufkin being the solitary type that would have little interest in romance. The subversion behind such so-called shipping is clear. These are attempts to deprive our children of examples of close male-to-male platonic bonds, the type of camaraderie that enables a man to be the best man he can be with the help of his male comrades. The type of camaraderie that enabled our ancestral bloodline to branch out from the steppes so long ago. By depriving our children of fictionalized examples of such close male bonds, the powers that be, that ultimately prop up such anti-natalist ideology, seek to isolate our male children and lead them towards hedonistic individualism. The reality of the children's series is quite the opposite to this agenda. The Moomin stories are filled with wonderful and complex individual characters, but the interaction and cooperation between all of these characters is what is celebrated. All of the characters in Moomin Valley, despite their different situations and worldviews, all work together to do what's best for their small rural community. In this sense, the subject matter seems very Neotribal, reflecting Tove Jansson's own dissatisfaction with the industrialization of Finland post-World War II, and her spiritual desire to retreat with friends and family to live in harmony with nature in a rural setting. In addition to the series' celebration of traditional living and subsistence, a traditional nurturing family structure, and its celebration of nature, these factors are most likely what has brought it so much attention from third position crowds. Now, the core themes of the Moomin series are family and friendship. More specifically, the interactions between the characters promote to the audience the idea that in a small rural setting, one's community is one's family. The Moomin family always welcomes their friends into their home with open arms, always doing their best to help their guests out with whatever problems they may face. The Moomin family also takes in visitors to the valley, who travel far seeking the kindness, hospitality, and the family bond that the Moomins share. While it may be merely coincidence, this behavior is clearly reflective of ancient Greek practices of xenia, hospitality, which more than likely stem from an early post-Yamnaya Indo-European custom. There are several children who live within Moomin Valley who are, in essence, adopted into the Moomin household, not as adopted children, but as cherished friends. This behavior is admirable to those of a neo-tribalist position, for they know that it is the responsibility of the community to ensure that all of the children of the tribe are properly cared for and educated to know right and wrong. To do so is to ensure the future of the tribe, which is depicted quite literally in the stories when Moomin Papa and Moomin Mama express their desires for Snork Maiden to grow up to become a fine wife for their young son Moomin. The series' themes of neo-tribalism are especially highlighted in the fourth book, The Exploits of Moomin Papa, also called Moomin Papa's Memoirs. In this book, Moomin Papa recounts the adventures of his youth. He is raised in an orphanage, but grows up desiring a life of adventure. Seeking a life of adventure, Moomin Papa then decides to run away from the orphanage, and eventually meets and befriends an older man named Hodgkin. Hodgkin is an inventor, who is planning to construct a ship to sail the seas in search of adventure. Through Hodgkin, Moomin Papa also meets the Jockster and the Muddler, later to become the fathers of Snufkin and Sniff, respectively. The four friends complete the ship, dubbing it the Ocean Orchestra, and set off for high adventure and new lands. This crew, this mannerbund of misfits, eventually arrives at an island ruled over by a king, coincidentally arriving at the time of the king's 100th birthday. The king likes the young adventurers and gives them permission to settle his island. The Jockster and the Muddler take wives from the island's native inhabitants, a practice akin to the marriages that many Indo-European warriors would partake in with the local women of the new territories they settled and conquered. While resting at his own house on the island's shore on one dark and stormy night, Moomin Papa feels a calling to the sea, where he sees a young woman lost among the crashing waves. He rescues the woman from the sea, who is revealed to be a young Moomin Mama. On the request of the king, the young adventurers and their new wives are to set off for new lands to found a colony for the king's kingdom. They land in Moomin Valley, where they build their homes, with the unions of the adventurers and their wives producing Snufkin, Little Mai, Sniff, and Moomin, the main characters of the Moomin series. This story highlights that the bonds between Moomin Papa and his comrades have physically manifested in the community they built together, and live on through the friendship between their children. This is the very essence of neo-tribal thought. Bonds of blood and friendship last over the generations. Also at the heart of neo-tribal thinking, the Moomins and the other residents of Moomin Valley all have a very intricate and intimate relationship with the land around them. The characters know every nook and cranny of the valley, where the best edible wild mushrooms and berries can be found, where the biggest and most beautiful fish can be caught, where the best spots to relax and have a picnic are, and the land itself plays a very important yet subtle role in the narratives of most of the stories. Nature is particularly important to Snufkin, who dwells in the wilderness alone and interferes with authorities who seek to regulate Moomin Valley's nature. When one considers the close relationship that each character has with the land around them, it makes sense that, in most regards, the characters of Moomin Valley seemingly hold on to pagan belief systems, particularly the reverence of nature and of ancestors. On multiple occasions throughout the books, the Moomins make reference to their ancestors living among them and watching over them, and indeed, their ancestors are depicted as small shadowy entities living in hidden places in their house, such as the chimney pipe, occasionally helping themselves to jam and other food stores. The idea that one's ancestors live on watching over the family, particularly in an ancestral dwelling, is common to many pagan traditions, Indo-European ones included. In their depiction, the ancestors of the Moomins resemble the ancient Roman cult of the Lares, household ancestral deities who ensure the prosperity and efficient running of the family household. Pagan-like celebration of the winter and summer solstices is actually the focus of 2 of the 9 Moomin books. The first of these books is Moomin Summer Madness, also known as Dangerous Midsommar in Swedish. The plot of this story is that, while the Moomins and friends are making preparation for their midsummer festivities, the valley is flooded, and they are forced to climb aboard a floating building, later revealed to be a theater. Later on, Moomin and Snork Maiden are separated from the group after napping together in a tree, and Little Mai falls overboard before being rescued by Snufkin. With the tribe split apart, they all partake in a series of misadventures while seeking to be reunited. Most of the book focuses on Moomin Papa and Moomin Mama's efforts to write and put on a play at the theater, with hopes that it will grab the attention and reunite them with their loved ones. In an interesting episode, which we shall discuss later, Snufkin and Little Mai harass a park keeper and rescue a bunch of children he was holding captive. At the end of the story, the whole Moomin Valley community boats over to the stage to watch the play that Moomin Papa and Moomin Mama have put on. Our tribe of protagonists is reunited, and everybody climbs aboard to have a great feast to celebrate Midsommar. The story of Moomin Summer Madness clearly alludes to traditional Swedish midsummer celebrations, themselves grounded in Scandinavia's pagan roots, but also focuses on theater, an activity that was often performed during holy days in ancient Indo-European pagan cultures, particularly in ancient Greece. The next book in the Moomin series is Moominland Midwinter, also known as Trollvinter. Winter has come, and the Moomins do not celebrate Christmas. They don't even know what Christmas is. While the Moomin family is hibernating through the long northern winter, Moomin awakens to find himself unable to fall back asleep. Following his adventurous nature, Moomin decides to leave the house and explore, only to find himself in a cold, unfamiliar, snowy wasteland. He is particularly shocked to learn that the sun does not rise in midwinter, a harsh reality of Hyperborean life. The cold unfamiliarity of the land prompts introspection within the young boy and makes him greatly miss the company of his close friend Snufkin. Moomin eventually meets with Little Mai, who is sledding down hills on his mom's tea tray, and a wise loner female character called Tutiki. From a literary perspective, this character is seemingly Snufkin's opposite counterpart, both providing Moomin with wisdom, but while Snufkin always leaves south in the winter, Tutiki only seemingly appears in the dark cold winter in Moomin Valley. Tutiki educates Moomin on the physical and spiritual realities of the winter, most importantly, how to honor and celebrate the Lady of the Cold. The Lady of the Cold in the story is described as a mysterious supernatural entity, a physical embodiment of winter who can instantly freeze those who glance her directly in the eyes. Clear comparisons can be made between this figure and the Norse winter goddess Skadi. Tutiki explains that the spirit will arrive preceding the beginning of the sun's return north, the midwinter solstice. To prepare for the Lady of the Cold's arrival as she retreats north from the sun, they build her a horse out of snow, which she brings to life and rides off into the horizon. Clearly, this story recounts a fictionalized pagan ritual for ensuring the end of winter and the return of the sun, something anybody who lives at a northern latitude will know is a cause for celebration. The inclusion of a sacrificial horse as a suitable offering in this ritual makes it seem particularly inspired by Indo-European tradition, given the overall prominence of horse offerings to the gods attested in all Indo-European sources. Moomin encounters other wintertime guests in Moomin Valley along the way, with the story culminating as Moomin onlooks at shadowy spirits, presumed to be the ancestral spirits of those who live in Moomin Valley, as they hold a massive midwinter bonfire to facilitate the return of the sun north. And indeed, the sun does return from its long journey in the south back to Moomin Valley, to bring life and warmth to the lives of all of Moomin Valley's residents. Of course, the sun is not the only source of joy to return to Moomin Valley in the spring, for in the spring, Snufkin makes his return northward. In many ways, the seasonal journey of both the sun and Snufkin are parallels. I do not think this is merely coincidence. Tove Jansson clearly intentionally designed this yearly habit of Snufkin to reflect the seasonal progression of the sun in her native Finland. In many ways, Snufkin embodies the solar archetype, but we shall explore this topic more after a quick break.
So I can come with you, Snufkin?
No.
What?
I'm sorry, but I've got to go on my own. Don't be disappointed, Moomin. I told you I travel alone. I need to, after spending the rest of the year here, just as I need to be here after spending the winter alone. And the joy of returning to Moomin Valley is something I wouldn't miss.
But Snufkin, I thought...
The time will soon pass, and you'll be asleep through most of it. You won't notice I'm not here. I'll see you next spring, Moomin. I'll be back on the first day, as usual, I promise, as soon as the weather warms. And when the flowers start to grow, nothing will keep me from Moomin Valley.
Of all the characters in Moomin Valley, Snufkin is, by far, the most popular, and for good reason. While most of the other characters are fully immersed in the simple and happy realities of life in Moomin Valley, Snufkin is a curious character and desires to know more of the world. In his travels, he has encountered many people and many sad situations, parts of the world less beautiful and less peaceful than Moomin Valley. Regardless, he journeys on, a nomad at heart, seeking to unravel life's mysteries step by step. When he has had his fill of the outside world, he returns back home to Moomin Valley, to a warm and beautiful wild land filled with lots of friends who eagerly desire his company and to hear the wisdom he has learned on his travels. How can we summarize Snufkin's character? Snufkin is primarily defined as a nomad or a vagabond in the books. He is a carefree soul who cares little for material possessions and chooses to wander the world in search of wisdom and an adventurous life. Unlike the Moomins, Snufkin is not really a fluffy white creature. He resembles a human, but is clearly not a human, perhaps some sort of dwarf or troll-like creature. His attire is that of the nomad, wearing a large green cloak and a wide-brimmed hat. He does not shy away from the company of others, but prefers to spend his time alone, often resting at his tent near the riverside, smoking his pipe, fishing, or playing the harmonica. He enjoys spending time in the company of the Moomins and friends, but has committed himself to the life of a vagabond. Every November, Snufkin packs up his few possessions and bids his friends farewell before heading south for the long winter ahead. Where he will end up, he does not know, but he travels on a whim and enjoys the journey for what it is. Every spring, Snufkin returns north to Moomin Valley to spend much of the year enjoying the raw natural beauty of Moomin Valley and the company of his friends and family. While Snufkin considers Moomin to be his best friend, he often acts as a mentor figure towards many of the younger members of the series. He offers them cryptic but profound philosophical musings whenever he is asked for advice. Considering his relatively young age, the source of Snufkin's wisdom is attributed to the lessons he learns and the people he encounters during his travels. Here are a few quotes from the Moomin books. When Moomin and the others first meet Snufkin, he attempts to explain to them his position on life. When asked where his home is, Snufkin answers, "Nowhere," or "everywhere." It depends on how you look at it. When asked of his possessions, he answers, "I own everything I see, and everything that pleases me. I own the whole earth. As long as I live here, I am the monarch of all I survey." Another favorite quote of mine involves an exchange between Moomin Papa and Snufkin, in which Moomin Papa asks the wanderer about what is happening in the outside world. Snufkin offers him a simple but succinct reply: fuss and misery. These quotes make it quite clear that Snufkin is much deeper than your average children's media character. His presence within the story is just as much to offer philosophical speculation to the young audience as it is to provide guidance to Moomin and the other youngsters in Moomin Valley. From a storytelling perspective, Moomin clearly serves as the self-insert character for the young audience. By relaying these lessons to Moomin, Snufkin is offering philosophical wisdom to the children listening to the stories. When we become parents, we can spend all of our time ensuring that our children are mentally and physically fit. But if we neglect to temper their spiritual strength, we are ultimately not fully preparing them to brave the outside chaos of the modern world. Many people have given their own audio essays on Snufkin's philosophy, so I'm not going to cover it very much. Instead, I wish to explore a unique angle. I want to explore the parallels between Snufkin and other characters and archetypes within the various Indo-European mythologies. Sticking to the series' Scandinavian origins, Snufkin's characterization as a wandering vagabond offering philosophical advice to strangers he meets parallels some characterizations of the great Norse god Odin. Both even dress similarly while wandering, opting for a cloak and a wide-brimmed hat. This outfit is emblematic of the heroic archetype of the Hermit King, which itself is derived from the archetype of the Prince of the Woods, a topic which we explored in depth in a previous episode of the Son of the North podcast. So, how is the archetype of the Hermit King connected to the archetype of the Prince of the Woods? When the Prince of the Woods loses the kingdom he fought for, or simply rejects the challenge to rise up against his tyrannical father, he eventually becomes the archetypal Hermit King. Simply put, the Hermit King is the king of the hermits. He is a wanderer with very few possessions save for the wisdom he has collected in his mind during his travels. To the ignorant or aloof outsider, he appears merely as a tramp, a fool who wastes his days wandering and being alone. But to the wise and initiated, they know that in rejecting titles and status, the Hermit King is perhaps the wisest king of all. The king who views all of the world as the realm he must protect, has spiritual mastery over the world around him. Again, I look back to the previous Snufkin quote: "I own everything I see and everything that pleases me. I own the whole earth. As long as I live here, I am the monarch of all I survey." The deeper philosophical meaning of this quote becomes twice as potent when interpreted in the context of the Hermit King archetype. Odin, as a manifestation of the Skyfather Dyaus, is not the only god who wanders across the earth. While the parallels between Odin and Snufkin are interesting given the series' Scandinavian roots, I believe that a comparison between Snufkin and the sun is much more tenable. The most obvious parallel between the two figures lies in their seasonal journeys. Both Snufkin and Sol call the north their home. For those of you who live at more central latitudes, you may be unaware of the projection of the sun during the different seasons at northern climes. In the north, Sol remains a constant presence in the sky during the summer months, warming and nurturing all life with his radiance. The lands and peoples of Hyperborea are the cherished favorites of Sol, which is why he spends most of his time here during the nicer spring and summer months. At the time of midsummer, the sun sets very late, or at extreme northern latitudes does not set at all. Even when the sun does set, the night sky still remains bright, as if one was struck with a smooth blending of dawn and dusk. In this context, the association of the dawn goddess Hausos with Sol makes much more sense. For those of us living in the north, the sun is a constant companion, always watching down on us in the warmer months. In the winter, the sun only shines for a few hours a day, often much dimmer than when it shines in the summer. This is because during the winter months, Sol Invictus must journey southward in his chariot, visiting the other peoples of the earth, learning from his travels, and, more importantly, vanquishing the adversaries whenever they pop their heads out from within the depths of the earth. Without his blessings of golden radiance and warmth, life in Hyperborea reaches a depressing standstill. The so-called days in the winter are long and dark, evoking imagery of Fimbulvinter, the eternal winter believed by the Norse to precede Ragnarok. Only when Sol has completed his annual duty to keep the adversaries at bay can he return north to his people in the spring. With his return and arrival in Hyperborea, there is much cause for celebration. Life, warmth, and joy return alongside the conquering sun god. The narrative of Sol's annual departure and return to his northern domain is clearly reflected in Snufkin. Within the Moomin books, Snufkin's character is defined by his yearly journey which he must follow. Whether or not he wants to leave Moomin Valley, he must go. When the cold northern winds finally reach Moomin Valley in the fall, Snufkin knows that it is time to depart southward, to unknown corners of the world, offering guidance and help to strangers who find themselves overwhelmed by the chaos and mercilessness of the world controlled by the powers that be. While he is away, life in Moomin Valley slows to a halt. The land is enveloped in a thick blanket of cold, unforgiving snow, and all creatures must either hibernate or freeze to death. Moomin, a close disciple of Snufkin, longs for his friend and his mentor. He longs for his return, so that he can bring his warm heart and wisdom back into Moomin Valley, and with him, bringing along the tides of spring. While the ignorant sleep, true devotees of the mighty Sol know the heart-wrenching anticipation of waiting for the glorious god's return. For only the return of the sun god can bring about the renewal of life in the frozen north. With Snufkin's eventual return to Moomin Valley, warmth and life are again renewed, and all can relax and celebrate knowing that the evils of the outside industrial world have been kept away due to the nomads' efforts. Snufkin's parallels with the sun god Sol are not only limited to this arc that is so defining of his character. There is a very interesting episode in Moomin Summer Madness which I will draw your attention to. In the story, Snufkin happens upon Little Mai, who has been separated from the rest of the Moomin family in the flood. The two reconcile, and Snufkin explains to Little Mai that he is off to confront an old enemy, the only person in the world who he, Snufkin, truly despises. Tagging along, Little Mai and Snufkin set off to face the Park Keeper, a creature who is in charge of a local park and an obsessively compulsive despot sort of figure. The Park Keeper enforces very strict rules upon his park, ensuring that only grass is grown, no other plants or forest life, and that vegetation is trimmed and cut into proper lines and shapes. Throughout the park are many signs with bold, aggressive lettering, listing the extremely strict rules that must be followed in his park. On the night of midsummer, Snufkin and Little Mai finally arrive at the park to deal with Snufkin's enemy. Snufkin sneaks into the park and plants seeds, which begin to sprout Hattie Fatteners, small tubular electric creatures that glow with light. Seemingly attacking at Snufkin's command, the Hattie Fatteners swarm the park keeper and chase him off, allowing Snufkin to enter the park and tear up the signs, then proceeding to burn them, and with them burning the oppressive rules in the park. While wandering around, Snufkin happens upon a group of 24 orphaned young children trapped in a sandbox by the park keeper. Now, the reason why the children are imprisoned is not specified within the book, but we can assume that it is because they broke some sort of rule. Snufkin approaches them and frees them, and much to his dismay, the children proclaim him as their father and begin to follow the lonesome figure around. The park keeper later returns to the park, angered to see that his signs are gone and that the children have been freed. Snufkin, Little Mai, and the children eventually stumble upon a cabin where they have a feast and a bonfire to commemorate the midsummer. This subplot of Moomin Summer Madness is particularly interesting, as it coincidentally parallels the various conflicts in which Sol engages with the adversaries. To rephrase the story to fit the context of our ancestral myths, the park keeper is essentially a write-in for one of the adversaries. He has established for himself an artificial claim to rule over this patch of the earth, which rightfully belongs to the gods. The adversary enforces strict and oppressive rules within his supposed domain, forcing nature to bend to his will, and forcing all who come to his realm to follow his ridiculous laws, which are visually ingrained into their mind with his signs, which, as indicated by the bright and aggressive lettering, are symbols for propaganda. Most insidious of all, the adversary seeks to separate his patrons from their children, and to keep these children for his evil designs. At the height of midsummer, when Sol is at his strongest, the conquering sun rides out and enters the lane claimed by his adversaries. He prepares for battle, bringing out a weapon imbued with electricity and light. With divine weapon in hand, Sol scares away his cowardly foe and goes on to destroy the tyrannical order imposed by the adversary, freeing the people of the land, most notably the children which the adversary seeks to devour. The children recognize the sun god, not as their literal father, but as their spiritual father, the divine lord who had liberated them and ensured the continuation of their lineages. They are the children of the sun, and on this holy day shall engage in a communal feast and a grand bonfire to honor Sol's victory. This mythical conflict is, in essence, the duty of the great Sol. By using Snufkin as a fill-in for Sol, and the park keeper as a fill-in for the adversary, this tale recounts the duties and victories of the sun god in a form that is easily digestible to children. It also explains to them how and when the achievements of the sun god should be celebrated. For those seeking to raise their children to understand their solar heritage and the traditions of their ancestors, what better method is there to introduce them to the solar path? Indeed, the very purpose of this episode of The Son of the North was for me to reveal to you the values of the Moomin series for getting your children interested in the themes and realities of life, for those who seek to navigate the Kali Yuga through the embracing of our divine solar heritage. Through the many adventures of Moomin and his friends, our children, the future of our tribes, are exposed to the realities of life in the far north, rural traditional living, the pagan worldview, and the mythology surrounding the journey and duties of the great sun god Sol. This information is exposed to them in a digestible and enjoyable format, in a text that engages the audience and does not assume that they are empty mental vessels simply because they are children. While the adversaries and their minions use media to corrupt our children and weaken the foundation of our tribes, we must do our best to emulate the great sun god Sol. We must stand up to the adversary and free our children, for they are our future. For those of you who are planning to have children, which, as a member of the solar bloodline, you should be planning on having children so as to not neglect our Dharma, then I encourage you to read through these books yourself and judge whether or not you think they would be acceptable to read to your children in the manner that you want to raise them. But I can assure you, the Moomin series is much more enriching for a child's development than 99% of the propaganda they serve to our children at public schools and on TV and in books every day. For those of you who are merely fans of the Moomin books and animations, I hope you have enjoyed my thoughts and commentary on this series. Alright friends, that's going to be the end of this week's episode of the Son of the North podcast. This topic is one that I wanted to discuss for a little while, as it's something that I find very fun and refreshing. A nice little change that's not so gloom and doom like the rest of the things in the Kali Yuga. If you liked today's episode, make sure to follow me on Spotify or Google Podcasts. You can also like this video and subscribe to my channel if you are listening to this on YouTube or BitChute. Once again, my name is Rex. I'm proud to have served as your momentary escape from the soul-crushing insanity of the Kali Yuga. May the gods bless you and your loved ones in the weeks to come.